Hey, Round Hill. Today we're going to talk about how my father in law's wise words that he used to give to his children will help us read the Bible. Today's passages is Numbers 5, Psalm 39, Song of Songs 3, and Hebrews 3. Now, let me give you some backstory about my father in law and his wise parenting. I had the unique experience of being able to date my wife when her brothers were quite a bit younger. When we first started dating, one of my brother-in-laws was only 10 and the other one was only 7. So I was able to watch my father-in-law and my mother-in-law parent their children as dating and got engaged and married my wife. But one of the things I always notice about my father-in-law, and my wife says that he said the same thing to her, is that anytime that they would get upset, there are times when they get upset and they get mad at my mother-in-law, my father-in law would just look at them and say to them, "You have a perception problem. You have a perception problem." And today, we're going to look at our reading of the Bible and how oftentimes we can read the Bible with this perception problem. That what we have to do is not dismiss what the Bible is saying, but change our perception. We see this today in our passage in Numbers 5. We see this weird thing where God is commanding the Israelites to act a certain way. It gets a little weird in verses 1 through 4, where the people that have infectious diseases have to live outside the camp for a while. We don't really see it in verses 5 through 10. They deal with justice, and I think the way they deal with justice, we can grasp that, say that seems pretty reasonable. But then it just goes crazy in verses 11 through 31. If you recall, and you will see that in verses 11 through 31, is the Lord is telling Moses, and Moses is telling the Israelites that if a husband suspects his wife of cheating on him, that he can take his wife to the priest, and there's some offerings that they'll give. But then there is a process where the priest will write down these curses on a scroll, and then he'll put the scroll in some water, and then the wife will have to drink the water. And then if she drinks the water and nothing happens, then she didn't cheat on her husband. But she drank the water and something happens where her abdomen swells up and her thighs swell up. That proves that she had been sleeping around on her husband. Now we can look at that. That's odd to us, right? And oftentimes we can see these passages like this, and we can think a few things. One, we can think, how cruel of God that he would do that to me. In the same way that oftentimes children will say that to their parents, where their parents will discipline them, and they'll say, "Oh, mom and dad, you were so cruel to me. You're so hateful." We have to, when we read those kinds of passages, we have to check our perception. We have to remember a few things. One, we have to remember the perception. We have to remember who's in charge here. Are you the master? Or are you the student when you read the Bible? If you're the master when you're reading the Bible, then you have every right and obligation to critique everything that's written in the Bible. But if you are the student in the Bible, your job is not to critique, it's to understand. Not to condemn what's being said, what's being written down, what you're reading, but to understand. Remember that when you are reading the Bible, you are the student, you are not the master. So when you come across passages that just don't make any sense, that you really struggle with, you will. That's okay. We are hearing the voice of God. We are reading the voice of God. And God is so much bigger and more mysterious that there's oftentimes things that he says and he does that we just do not understand. It's okay. But remember, we are the student. We are not the master. Second thing is we need to check our cultural perceptions. We need to check our cultural perceptions. In other words, the perception I think that is pretty prominent every year, every decade, every culture is that we are much more informed, we're much smarter, we're much better off now than the people way back when were. And there can grow a cultural snobbery in that. It's kind of like, teenagers that they will think their parents are stupid because they just don't know technology like their parents do. Like their mom or dad or have their smartphone or looking on social media and like, how do you do this? And the parents are like, oh, mom, dad, you just got to do this, this, and this, and this. Now, the fact that that teenager knows more about technology, is it true that that teenager knows more about technology that the parents aren't valuable? Or actually know more than a teenager? Does a teenager's understanding of technology mean that they don't need to be taught by the parent? No, you know that. No. The parent has to live longer. The parent has experienced more, that though they may not know this situation, that they know more. Folks, we need to remember and evaluate our cultural perception and know that just because we live in 2020 does not mean that we are better or know more than those that lived 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. That they actually may have some things to offer to us and to understand that we have totally forgotten. Check your culture perception. Make sure that you're not being a snob. Last thing you can do is don't discount what the Lord told other cultures to do. Don't discount. This is a weird passage. I mean, no one would do this today. No one's like, well, I think no teacher in their right mind would say, well, I think my student is cheating on their test, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the consequences of cheating, and then I'm going to dissolve that piece of paper in water, and then that student has to drink the water, and if their heads swell, then that means that they've been cheating. No, we would never do that. Why? Because we know some science that says this or that the ink would not, or in the pulp and the paper would react. So there's chemical processes that maybe the reason that the student's heads swells is not because they've been lying, but because of some chemical interactions. Now, to say that's the way we understand it, and I'm not saying that that's wrong, but is it possible that the Lord of science, Yahweh, the very being that created science that we have today, that he may know more than us? Is it possible that during this time that he manipulated the chemicals, the process, in order for husbands to have justice, in order to correct wrong behavior? He loved the wife so much that he corrected wrong behavior in this way. Does it sound weird? Yes, and we can admit that. I mean, I look at this, I'm like, this is so weird. But it was something that the Lord commanded. And it was something that not just this isn't just some guru. Now, see, here's another thing that we oftentimes discount. Is we read stuff like this and we think, oh, I've seen similarities to this tyrant that made his people do this, or this government that made their people do this, and it was terrible and it was wrong. And we are right to look at those situations and say those people, those governments were wrong, those kings were wrong, those tyrants were wrong to do that. But when the Lord commands the Israelites to act a certain way, he is not the tyrant. He is a good God that knows right and wrong, knows good things. So we can't. It's not a fair comparison to compare him with sinful kings and sinful governments, compared to a great and gracious and merciful and loving God. So even in his punishment, there's mercy. There's real justice. There's no selfishness on his part. He's doing it out of love. Kind of crazy. It's easy to lose our perception on all that. So when you encounter hard passages like this, just take a step back and make sure you don't have a perception problem. Make sure you don't have a perception problem. Tomorrow's passages is number 6, Psalms 40 and 41, Song of Songs 4, and Hebrews 4. I'm so glad that you're joining us. I encourage you to keep reading. Folks, this is important. This is wonderful. The more you dig into it, the more you understand, the more you love this God, and it will change everything you do. Keep reading, keep understanding, and I'll see you tomorrow.